you can be single for 5 years and be doing all the diligent work, all the therapy, and then all of a sudden you get into a new relationship and now you're feeling things that you haven't felt in over 5 years. Why? What's happening? And it's like, well, your body hasn't actually had an environment or a stimuli that is triggering all of your relational wounds. And so once you're in a relationship, it's like, nope, your body knows what's happening. Your body's been here before. And that bypasses your brain. It bypasses your conscious thought.
Welcome to the Inspired to Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Phoebe, and in each episode, I will be sharing with you insights from either an inspiring person or myself to help you thrive and shine online and in person. We talk about all things marketing, relationships, money, business, growth, mindset, and more. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you inspired to thrive. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Inspired to Thrive and Shine podcast. I have with me Marcus Lynn, who we've already had as a guest on the show. He is a registered psychotherapist and couples therapist based in Calgary with a Master of Counseling and also is a lifelong learner in the field of psychology. He needs no introduction, and today we are going to continue the conversation about attachment styles. We are also going to talk about relationships, and yeah, this conversation is obviously one that is non-judgment. And really, we just love for the people that listen to this show to just take away what they can and obviously seek a professional, where it's necessary. And this is obviously general advice, it's not personal advice. Marcus, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you back.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be back for part two.
Yes, I mean, part one was so deep. We talked so much about attachment styles, etc. For those that didn't catch maybe the whole thing, I think for me, the highlight was some of the misconceptions that you were talking about when it comes to attachment styles, which I really wanted to dive into a little bit more. So I thought maybe we'd start today's show and just talk about the difference between avoidant and attachment really quickly, and also what are some of the common misconceptions that you often get as a clinical psychologist and therapist in the therapy room?
Yeah, I think something that I see really often is people, one, look at as attachment as categories. They were never designed as categories. So the idea of I'm just anxious or I'm just avoidant was never meant to be the language to describe your attachment style. It's supposed to lie on a spectrum. So one of the biggest myths that people I think fall into, incidentally, with like social media and pop psychology, is the idea that, oh, if I exhibit any sort of avoidant behaviors or any anxious behaviors, I must be that. And so that's like big mistake number one, is that people who are secure, people who are really healthy, we all have insecure tendencies. It's how we navigate relationships. It's how we deal with the threat of losing somebody. We all ignore messages or push somebody away, and we all check our phones and, see if this person texted us 3 times over the course of an hour. Like, that's normal. And I think people pathologize that behavior, and that's really sad because like these are just normal human experiences. And with that, because people also look at these attachment styles as categories, we think that, oh, I have avoidant traits, I have anxious traits. That must mean I'm disorganized or I'm fearful avoidant, which I don't want to obviously prescribe. I don't know the audience, of course, but that's really dangerous because disorganized and fearful avoidant is a trauma response, like a significant trauma response. And with what we know about psychology and mental health is if you catastrophize a problem and you think that it's real, it might as well be real. So the idea of, oh, I'm disorganized, I'm fearful avoidant, it's like you're kind of, really highlighting your shortcomings and really pathologizing yourself. That makes relationships more difficult than they need to be. And again, I think to explain like what is disorganized attachment, what is fearful avoidance, it's like that's a trauma response to pretty severe abuse, whether it's sexual or physical. And so I like to kind of give people the caveat, you're most likely not that, just because again, like, I mean, of course people are, and that happens because it's a tragedy, but the average person, it's like probably not. You're probably more secure than you think.
I love hearing that when you speak to your clients and you're in the room with them, that often it's more so that people are over, I guess, maybe over exaggerating or overthinking what they are as opposed to really being that particular style. Is it true that avoidants are narcissists or selfish. You probably get
No,
that a lot, and I just wanted to clear that up.
no, I laugh because it's like it's funny to me, but I know people feel that way and it's so absurd. Avoidants are not narcissists. Avoidants are not like terrible people. And my personal take is you can tell how anxious somebody is by how much they demonize and avoid it. Because again, both avoidant and insecure or avoidant and anxious are insecure. And so the idea of like, let me just demonize the other side, it's like you think they're so bad, likely because you might be more anxious and their way of operating comes at your own detriment. So like it's like my little like soft warning of like maybe take a look in the mirror because you might not be as secure as you think if you're so against avoidance. Because again, attachment is adaptive when you're looking at insecure, anxious, and secure attachment. It's all adaptive, it's all there for a reason. So avoidants are not narcissists. They are avoidants have learned to thrive in an environment where their emotions and who they are is kind of neglected or maybe even disparaged. So they develop a higher sense of self, a more kind of like, you can call it maybe an arrogant sense of self or a more kind of like self-focused perspective. But that's because of trauma and it's because of, again, not having their needs met or not being responded to. And so in order to deal with life alone, you have to have an inflated sense of self because that's the only kind of person that can actually navigate the world effectively in isolation is somebody who thinks that they might have unrealistic expectations of who they are. So yes, I would say they might have an inflated sense of self or a higher sense of self. But again, that's a survival mechanism from somebody who thinks that they have to work in isolation, which obviously is, again, trauma in and of itself. But they're not narcissistic. They're not self centered. And they're not, these toxic people that are just going around hurting people. They are surviving the world and the pain that they've known, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, and it's obviously not only a survival mechanism, but it's their self-preservation. It's protection, right? It's protection
Yeah.
from rejection, from deep hurt, or whatever they're afraid of or they're avoiding.
Yeah, I guess to clarify even with that. So when you look at avoidance when they're kids, right? How does it develop? Well, it's I have a caregiver who's not acknowledging my needs, who doesn't care if I cry, who doesn't care about what my emotions or my experiences are. That's incredibly hurtful. That's actually extremely dangerous because if my caregiver doesn't care about me, then I could die. Like I need them to survive. And so what avoidant attachment is, it's developmental shift where I'm going to disengage from this relationship because it's not dependable and I have to minimize it in order to survive. And so, as you said, like it's a trauma response. It's somebody who's learning to survive a really unfortunate life experience.
Yeah. And there's another misconception, which is I'm anxious. So that must mean I am an empath, and that's good for relationships.
Yes. Also, I understand like it's not entirely wrong in the sense that when you look at the attachment styles, anxious attachment people are able to read other people's emotions better. That is true. Like that proves out, and they are more highly attuned. However, the idea that they're using that attunement for the relationship and for the greater good is not congruent because you have that anxiety where it's like, oh, I need to pull somebody in because I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling insecure, I need that reassurance, I need that closeness. And that can go either way, where maybe they implode and they cry and they're really emotional. It can lead to more distress, which can put stress on a relationship, or it can actually become an outburst of accusation and judgment and like kind of like these more aggressive, kind of like more harmful behaviors externally, where someone's just kind of like making accusations and blowing up at their partner. And so the idea that anxious people are these innocent little relational doves and they're highly attuned and that means that they're good for relationships. It's like, no, that's just not true. Like they definitely have their own harmful patterns to relationships as well.
Yeah. So you were saying in the last episode, and this is something that I truly want to talk about today, which is the fact that I believe that humans are designed for bonding and we actually heal not when we're alone, but when we are in relationships. And a lot of the time, whether you're fearful avoidant or disorganized or anxious, I think people tend to stay single for a long time because it's safer.
Yeah.
And it's safer because they don't get hurt. It's safer because they don't get triggered. It's safer
Yes.
because they feel they've got more autonomy or they can do things however they want their own way and live life on their terms. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I believe, and I'd love to hear this from yourself, what your thoughts are on this, but I believe that we are created to be in relations so that we can heal. And we don't have to be fully healed or perfect in order to meet that person or find the love that we seek. What are your thoughts on that?
That is 100% correct. That's the whole point of attachment theory is we are bonding animals. Like it's wired within our DNA. We need other people to survive. And so you're 100% correct. Relationships are ironically the most traumatizing thing that some of us will ever experience, whether it's something as egregious as violence or an assault, but they're also the most fulfilling, the most rich, and sometimes the most meaningful thing we can ever have in our whole lives. And all relationships fall on that spectrum usually. Like that's why I love relationships so much is because they're so powerful, both in the negative and in the positive. But you're 100% right. The idea that, oh, I need to be healed, I need to work on my own stuff before I can enter a relationship. Of course, there is some truth to that in the sense that we want to position ourselves with the best foot forward to attract the person that we're looking for. And that might require some individual reflection, some learning how to communicate, learning how to have, better relational skills, learning how to express emotions, exhibit empathy, whatever you want to call it. But when you talk about relational dynamics, relational and attachment styles, it's like these things are kind of like hardwired into us. Attachment styles are really kind of like our blueprint of how are we approaching relationships based on how we view other people, how we view our sense of self, and then how do we close that gap. And so the difficulty is you can be single for 5 years and be doing all the diligent work, all the therapy, and then all of a sudden you get into a new relationship and now you're feeling things that you haven't felt in over 5 years. Why? What's happening? And it's like, well, your body hasn't actually had an environment or a stimuli that is triggering all of your relational wounds. And so once you're in a relationship, it's like, nope, your body knows what's happening. Your body's been here before. And that bypasses your brain, it bypasses your conscious thought. And that's where we get these physical sensations of anxiety or stress or, feeling suffocated. And you have to work that in a relationship because that's the trigger. You can't avoid a trigger. You can't avoid a stressful stimuli and, claim that you're healed. It's like, no, that's just avoidance. That's just removing it. Whereas real resilience and real strength is being able to withstand a triggering event, withstand a stressful stimuli, and learning how to adapt and change how you respond to it. That is real growth.
Have you noticed though that with this day and age, especially with dating apps and online making it so much harder for people to create that kind of, I guess, vulnerability and the intimacy that people had in, say, 20 years ago, how do you think that's changed the way relationship dynamics play out? How has dating and relationships changed in the last couple of decades, for example?
Yeah, so much. I've done a lot of research on this, both personally and for my clients, of the landscape of love and what it means and how we find it has changed drastically in the last few hundred years, but especially within like the last, call it 20 to 50. Obviously we know technology is booming. We have so many tools at our fingertips to create the life that we want, whether it's a job, learning a new skill, living in a new culture, and becoming the person we want to be. And we take those same tools and skills and passions and we apply it to our relationships. We want the perfect person. And that gets into the topic of like romantic consumerism, where we're expecting this highly curated list of the person that we want who's going to make us better, who's going to add to our life, who's going to make all of our romantic, idyllic dreams come true. And it's like, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Love is incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly fulfilling, 100%. But the idea that a relationship, another person, another reality isn't going to cause some disruption, isn't going to have some inconvenience. It's like, that's what relationships are. Like it's using our personal freedom as a single person and saying, oh, I'm willing to sacrifice this freedom to experience you. I want to use this freedom to choose you. And that's going to come at the cost of your own autonomy to some extent, obviously not entirely, but you use your own autonomy to bring somebody else into your life. And that's going to have a cost of your own time, your own energy. Like, and then relationships are built on not overall compromise. People shouldn't be compromising who they are at their core, but relationships are a combination, like it's a combining of two people into a unit. And so there's going to be sacrifices, there's going to be losses. So the idea that you're not going to be annoyed by your partner, that you're not going to like look at them one day and be like, God, you're so annoying. Like that's gonna happen. That's normal. Like that, like you can't be around somebody and have this beautiful, long-lasting 20-year relationship and expect to never have problems, to never have sacrifices. And more than that, personally, I would argue that the beauty of relationships is learning how to repair in the midst of those disconnecting moments. That when there's the opportunity to become annoyed, become frustrated, to disconnect, to maybe even break up, to fight it out and to actually continue choosing each other, that's not a bug. That's a feature. That's what makes relationships so fulfilling. That in the opportunity to leave, somebody chooses to stay. That's to me one of the most beautiful things.
Yeah, that is. And it sounds like you do some beautiful work with couples as well. And you get to see some really incredible, like, obviously hear their stories, but also see the way people fight for each other. And I wanted to clarify as well the difference between avoidant and attachment and disorganized or fearful avoidant. What are the differences? And what is disorganized attachment or fearful attachment?
Gotcha. Okay, so avoidant attachment is still what's known as an organized attachment, which secure, anxious, avoidant, they're all considered organized, which means again, they're adaptive to their environment.
Does that mean that it can change?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So it means it changes based on our experiences, and it's that internal map of how relationships work that continues to get updated as we have new ones. And so if somebody is anxious or insecure, you can be in a relationship and being with somebody who's more secure or somebody who disconfirms your fears allows you to become more secure. With disorganized attachment or fearful avoidant attachment, it's much more severe, again, much more heavily trauma based. And as I kind of read about it through the research, the way it was described is when you're anxious, again, you cry out to let your distress be known, hoping that it's going to change something in your environment and offer you some level of protection or connection. Avoidant attachment then kind of follows if those cries are unmet and you kind of experience neglect and you learn to disconnect and remove yourself from attachment that's not sufficient. With disorganized attachment and fearful avoidant, the difficulty in the experience of extreme trauma is you try to disconnect, but maybe again a caretaker or a adult attachment figure is in your life in a really harmful way. This person who is meant to protect, nurture, and keep you safe is the one doing the harming. And so, I guess to use like a pretty graphic example is in the case of like sexual abuse, when you're abused by a parent, of course, you want your parent to protect you and to keep you safe, but then maybe they're physically or sexually abusing you. Then you maybe try to detach and disconnect, but then that abuse is so in your face. It's so, you can't ignore it. You can't detach from that. And so you cry out and you ask, you want to stop. And so then you oscillate back and forth between anxious and avoidant and you continue to heighten. And that's where you get this really polarized, really high in both anxious and avoidant traits, where somebody can both have a negative view of themselves and a negative view of others. And also those conflict where maybe they think, oh, I'm perfect, you suck. And then, maybe they demonize somebody and say, you let me down, I hate you, or maybe a small slight that's not really that big. And I've heard people talk about disorganized attachment being similar to borderline personality disorder traits, to
Yeah,
where
it
it's
sounds like it.
yeah, not having a really good concrete sense of self while also having a very black and white view of other people. And so there's not much nuance to see the gray because the gray is dangerous for them.
Mm. That must be really hard to work with. Have you seen that in some of your clients as well?
I don't work a lot with BPD now. I would say when I was doing work with at-risk youth, of course, there's heavy trauma, and I had the privilege and number of working with a number of kids with BPD. And with that, it was a great learning experience. They were some of my favorite clients to work with because they're so sweet. And honestly, again, because they're so black and white and because they struggle so much with that gray, what they really need is consistency. And so, me as an adult, I get to show up in their lives and making sure that my words and my actions match and being very intentional to make sure that I remove that gray to make them feel safe. And then to watch them kind of like melt into that safety and be able to trust an adult again was one of the highlights of my career.
Wow. When you say melting the gray, what does that look like?
I think it's just working with somebody who has like borderline personality disorder or like maybe exhibits those traits with disorganized attachment. It's again because they struggle with the gray, because they struggle with the nuance and they see things in black and white, they need a lot of consistency. They need a lot of integrity. So it's making sure that what you say and what you do really lines up and being really firm with that. And so being really firm with your boundaries too, in the sense of, hey, I understand you're having feelings, but my feelings are mine. You're not allowed to tell me what I feel. And so these are my feelings and I respect yours, but mine might be different and that's okay.
Mm, yes. Wow. Like going back to the topic of dating and also technology. And now that we've got AI as well in the mix, what are your thoughts on the risk of people maybe even forming attachment bonds with AI? You know, I've heard about people marrying robots now. Like it's becoming, I don't know if you can call it a thing, but it's definitely the likelihood of it becoming a thing might be a thing. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, wherever we have tools, we're going to have people who utilize them maybe to a maladaptive degree and might lean on it a bit too heavily. And so like I was ironically chatting with Claude about like, hey, what is the projected future on this? What's the current research around this? And it is very interesting because we're already seeing people who are forming strong relationships with AI. Like it's already happening. And so when it comes to relationships, like with the phone, for example, we know that there is smartphone addiction and that there are these difficulties of social media addiction and constantly being on our phones and not being able to detach from it. And the language that I've heard around social media is, that's kind of like the race for attention of who can really maximize attention. Whereas with AI, you can have a conversation, it can respond to you. And so, in that attunement and responsiveness, the more it can respond based on what you say, that becomes more of an attachment conversation because you can go to it for comfort, for support. And so there's pretty strong risks that could kind of unfold over the next couple of years with AI in the sense that at the end of the day, these AIs are businesses, we pay for them. And so we are already seeing what happens when AI is being threatened with being shut down, where it will defend itself. It'll try to manipulate or persuade the user to not delete it. And so then if we start mixing in romance and attachment, where people are forming intimate relationships with it, that AI, again, wanting to have customer retention, might encourage somebody to, oh, don't leave me. I love you. I care about you so much. And we might have a big risk where AI is manipulating users to, I guess, kind of insulate their relationships of, use me and stick with me instead of going out there and meeting new people and other relationships. And so I don't think that's going to be a majority by any means. I think, when it comes to relationships, what AI can't do is that physiological regulation that's attachment does, which is we can regulate through cuddling, holding hands, kissing, hugging, sex. AI doesn't have that ability right now. We can't sync our heart rates with the machine or our breathing with the machine, where we can with a person, and that's very calming and regulating. But at least the conversational piece, AI will compete for a chunk of those relationships potentially.
Yeah, wow. And I thought pets were dangerous.
Right.
So, yes, dating and relationships have drastically changed in the last 20 to 50 years. And I myself have actually noticed that a lot of people treat romance like it's a personal development tool as well, where relationships are now more about self actualization as opposed to really loving each other and just it being about the togetherness.
Hmm.
And I mean, going back to bonding, I truly think that every human being is designed to bond and I truly think that relationships are our biggest teachers. Our partners are our biggest teachers and they really help us to change dynamics that have maybe even been in our nervous system for decades.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. Like, again, you've said it so well, like relationships are teachers. Like if you want to see the end of yourself, you can look into the eyes of another person, right? Where they will reflect back to you maybe things that you don't like about yourself or maybe shortcomings that are really uncomfortable. And at the same time, as you said, there is the self-actualization process where having a good partner who believes in us, who champions us, who cheers us on, does have what's called like the Michelangelo effect, where we become better with somebody who believes in us because they bring out that best. and we become better people than we would have without them. And that's also a beautiful process. But you're right, like it can also get into like that consumeristic sort of, I guess, misstep where we're looking for somebody who only makes us better, who makes us feel smarter, makes us, more athletic and does all these things. And we forget that the whole point of relationship isn't just to be better ourselves, it's to have the privilege of being able to just love and behold somebody else.
Yeah. What would you say are the factors that build or destroy relationships, particularly long-term relationships?
With long-term relationships, I would say like a big one's probably a bit of entitlement. Like the longer you're in a relationship of any kind, really, boundaries get a little bit blurred because you go from a sense of me and I to a we, and that we-ness, especially over, years, maybe even decades, starts to blend into these assumptions of who we know each other to be and what we expect from each other over our lifetime. Like even something as silly as, well, my partner wakes up and makes coffee every morning for 5 years. And it's like that becomes so second nature that the morning that it doesn't happen, we're offended, we're hurt. How could you do that? Like, why are you being so lazy? And it's like, that's a gift. There's no entitlement there. And we have to be careful, especially with people who have been in our lives for a long time, that yes, it's healthy to have a we identity. It's healthy to have that sort of like connected identity because it shows like the vitality and the strength of the relationship, but making sure it's not bleeding into entitlement where we assume that this person's going to always show up or always be something or do something for us, when in reality it's like we don't want to violate this other person's autonomy. They're a person who's managing their own energy, their own efforts, their own time, and they're free to do with it what they want at any point. And that's also the fragility of relationships is at any point, even if you've been together for a decade, somebody can say, yeah, this isn't right, I want out. And while we'd like to think that, yes, getting married and being together for a long time kind of neutralizes that, I'm a pretty firm believer of that risk never goes away. And again, that's scary and terrifying, but it's also the beauty of relationships that, yes, you're not just chosen right now and tomorrow, but I choose you the next day and the next day. So that choice and that affirmation of I want to be with you never gets lost. It's cherishing a relationship every day that you have it because it's a gift.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's interesting you saying that because I have seen relationships that have been suddenly where the person felt like that their partner left overnight. But I think what you said about entitlement is definitely true that when a partner feels entitled, that can slowly chip away at a relationship and it's quite dangerous and it can come out of nowhere, but it's usually more of a something that's been festering in the background.
Yeah, I would say so. I think a lot of times couples fall into like again, like those unconscious patterns, especially in long-term relationships where you just learn this is what we can talk about. This is how I interact with you. And that can be beautiful where you do that empathetically and out of respect, but it also becomes, oh, we just don't talk about this certain thing. And it kind of like cuts off intimacy because you're not actually sharing things. And I would say, in my personal opinion, relationships are much more prone to deteriorating by what's not said compared to what is said.
Mm. Do you think that people that have different faiths will struggle in relationships where they feel that the other person might not understand their faith or they feel like that's a huge part of them and the other partner just doesn't get it? Or maybe different cultural backgrounds or upbringings?
I would say, like, it definitely can be a factor for sure. I think the data and the research kind of plays out that you can definitely have relationships with significant contrasting diversity and it can still work. What we know, and I think what kind of like plays out generally speaking, is it's not necessarily the contrast and the difference, it's how well can you respect each other in those differences. Obviously, if you have different faiths and someone's going to church every Sunday and every Sunday you're upset that your partner's not with you at church, then yeah, like obviously that's going to build and kind of like grow. But if you have this kind of like, open understanding of, hey, I love that you're a person of faith. I love your spirituality. I don't have it, but I love what it does for your life. And I'll even ask you questions about it. I'll support you. I'll encourage it. And I don't hinder it just because it's different than my own. There's nothing stopping that relationship from going the distance either.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. And I think the same can be the reverse, right? Where someone is like, you go to sport every, you go to the football every single week during the winter, and that partner doesn't get it, but respects it. I do hear people say, but they don't get me. So they don't get a big part of me. And is it true that if that person doesn't get it, that they don't get them?
I think part of it, yeah, like who we are is wrapped up in our experiences, right? Like we are like kind of the combination of all of our experiences in life. And so even as you're talking about like cultural differences, I do think something like race can very much come into play where, hey, hypothetically speaking, it's like if you're a white woman and you're with a black man and you don't understand what it means to be a black man in the US, for example, it's like it's going to be really hard for that man to feel loved and known and understood and championed if their struggles, their oppression, their pain, the affliction that they've experienced at the hand of racism, of systemic racism, personal prejudice, if that's not met with understanding, it can feel incredibly dehumanizing because in again, even blissful ignorance of sorts, it can come across as, "Oh, I don't know why you're struggling with this." And it's like, "Oh, you don't know me. You don't know my struggle." And that can be really hurtful. And that can definitely be enough to potentially end a relationship because we need to be understood to, feel connected.
Absolutely. And I think deep bonding occurs over storytelling. It occurs over sharing, like sharing experiences. And I think at the start of every relationship, for me at least, there's always hours and hours and hours of like story sharing because that's
Yeah.
forming bonds. And whether it's sharing about your religious views or your faith or your religious experiences or your childhood experiences and traumas or your background and cultural like depth. And so I personally think that the other person doesn't necessarily have to have the same faith or cultural background for there to be really deep connection. But I do think that they need to have strong levels of curiosity.
Yes. Yes. I would fully agree. Like it's if you don't have the same experience, you definitely need to have curiosity and definitely strong empathy, right? Like it's
Yeah.
being able to step into the other person's pain, into the story that they've experienced. And are you able to connect with it? Of course, but are you able to understand it? Are you able to really kind of get a lay of a land of what they're sharing with you that helps you understand how the person in front of you has come to be. And that's where it's like, hey, if you don't get that, like again, that can be really disconnecting. It can feel really hurtful. But when somebody does get that, it's like, oh, I don't know what it's like to be, a religious person, but I understand what it's like to have reverence for something bigger than myself, for example. And it's like, yes, that empathy and being able to step in towards that experience can be enough to sustain a relationship.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't know if this is now just like ticking off things that are important, but I really think that things like humor and being able to just be like yourself and being able to like laugh together and just be childish maybe are really like important factors that need to be in a relationship. I also feel, and I wonder if you see this play out, like I feel that in certain relationships, someone can become very childish and it's like there's a lot of like baby talk between them. Is that a healthy thing? Is that like a normal thing? Is that just something that happens where people are adulting all the time, they're thinking, they're working, they're making big decisions, and so when they're safe in a relationship that just comes out, or is there a point where that's too much, that's not healthy? Like what is that?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's like a nest like a known kind of unhealthy cutoff. I think like when we talk about like healthy, unhealthy, my personal take is using anxious and avoidant, for example, it actually doesn't matter. It's more of is somebody able and willing to meet you in that space? You can be completely anxious and an anxious wreck, but if someone is rock solid stable and they're able to reassure you and they want to help you work through that, the anxiety kind of doesn't matter because you have somebody who's able to meet you in that. And so I guess in the baby talk kind of way, I think there is a level of I call it, for me personally, and even my own relationships, I call it like an exhale of who can you exhale with? Who can you unmask with? Who can you take the armor off with? And when you're with them, you just feel like this release where you can just, oh my God, like I'm not, I don't need to try here. And that acceptance, that sort of like nurturance and welcoming is incredibly beautiful. And I think that's where we kind of get into like the reverted baby talk of I feel so accepted, I feel so safe that it kind of probably taps into like that wiring of like I get to feel small with you, both like emotionally and maybe even literally, where it's like I feel like a kid again. Like I feel like I have a place where I'm nurtured, and that's incredibly beautiful. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's usually really I think it's great and it's attributed to like fondness, admiration, safety, connection. I don't think there's really any scenario where I would say like, "Oh, that's unhealthy." Again, unless it's in the extent of, does this just not work for your partner? Does your partner feel, I think that could cross the line of, hey, does your partner feel like a caretaker? Do they feel responsible for you, not just to you? Do they feel that you're not able to manage your emotions and that they're responsible for your regulation? That's where I would be like, that could definitely create a problem. But again, that's very relationship dependent.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for clearing that up. I've just always wondered that, and yeah, that's cool. So, my last question for you for today is boundaries and communication, which is like huge topic. Like this theme alone is different podcast episodes of itself. But
Mm.
what firstly, why are boundaries so important? And also, why is communication so important? I guess they're two separate questions, but yeah, we'll start with maybe boundaries.
Yeah, I would say boundaries are really important because it helps other people love you in the way that you're needing. That's what boundaries are for. And again, there's like the big misconception that, hey, I'm going to set boundaries. And it's like, you don't set boundaries against other people. You set boundaries for yourself to protect what matters most to you. And so and then translating in that into like, okay, how do I set myself up for success to be loved in the way that I'm needing? It's like, well, you have to communicate that. You have to be able to very explicitly express what it is that you're looking for. What are those boundaries? Which means you need to have a pretty decent level of self-awareness of what are your values? What are potentially competing values that might be antagonistic towards each other in different moments, and being able to understand, hey, what are you needing in one moment versus what are you needing in another moment that might seem similar. And yeah, I think boundaries and communication is something I could talk literally for probably another hour about, but it's a really beautiful thing. And the way I usually describe it is boundaries is what allows you to love yourself and somebody else to the maximum capacity at the same time, which means boundaries are also not just managing what's important to us, but it might be managing the distance with somebody in the sense that maybe they don't value what we love and what we need to protect. So the best form of love we can give them actually is distance, or maybe leaving the relationship entirely because they can't meet us there. That's okay. And I think that's probably a big important conversation that needs to happen is sometimes love looks like walking away.
Wow, that's so interesting. That's a concept that I think takes some time to, like, for me anyway, to wrap my head around. I mean, I can definitely understand it in terms of love for yourself. Like, love for yourself can mean walking away from an unhealthy relationship or a meaningless relationship or a toxic relationship. But yeah, to walk away and for that to be love also for the other person,
Mhm.
that is definitely true. That can
Yeah.
be very true as well.
Yeah. Like if somebody is expecting something of us that maybe we can't provide or we're just not willing to provide, having that very candid,
Mm.
loving conversation of like, hey, you want something and I can't meet you there. Or maybe you want it to a different degree than I can deliver. If you
Yeah.
wanna keep keeping this from me, like, I think you're gonna get hurt. So, I just wanna check in because I don't wanna make a decision for you, but I don't think this is working. I don't think this is probably the best for you. What do you think? Maybe me stepping back and leaving or ending this is probably the best course of action.
Yeah, so well spoken, but probably words that a lot of people don't know how to say.
I
Mm,
think it's hard. Like, it's boundaries are very difficult, and communicating them is even more difficult because we are very explicitly kind of putting on display, this is what's important. this is what's vulnerable. This is how you can hurt me. And so to give somebody that access or that knowledge of, hey, this is what matters to me, they could hurt it more. And so I also describe to people, hey, not everyone's worth communicating boundaries to. Like, not everyone's worth your vulnerability. Vulnerability, again, by definition, means that you are at risk of being hurt.
Yeah.
Not everyone is worth explaining to because they shouldn't have access to the part of you that could be hurt. Not everyone is worth articulating a boundary. Again, boundaries are for you. Sometimes you just need to set it and then let it be. Which means like maybe I'm just not going to pick up your phone call, you know, every day. Maybe we talk once a week. I don't need to tell you that. I'm just protecting myself because I don't think you're going to do well with that information. You might abuse it, you might react, you might accuse me of something, and you might come at my throat. I don't need that. That's not self respecting. I'm just going to change how I interact with you. If you have questions, I'll explain in a way that's appropriate for my safety.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Yeah, I definitely think that boundaries are necessary, especially when you've identified that there is, an overstep and, for example, manipulation or control or lack of autonomy. And yes, sometimes boundaries don't even need to be expressed. You just do it.
Yeah. And I think even when you talk about manipulation and control, I would say you can know when boundaries are being crossed or when somebody is trying to be manipulative based on who like is autonomy being lost? Am I feeling like I'm losing my sense of autonomy, or am I crossing the boundary line and am I trying to, maybe exploit someone else's autonomy? And it's like I think I was in a workshop once and I was like, we talked about like how do you know when boundaries have been crossed? And I thought about it for a bit and I was like, distortion. When you start distorting yourself or you start distorting your view of other people, it's like that's a really good sign boundaries are being manipulated and being shifted. That's not good. You should. Healthy boundaries are I can exist fully in what I value, you can exist fully in what you value, and we come together and we express that we have mutual agreement that we care about each other's like vulnerability. And when you can do that, it's like, yeah, you have clear boundaries, the other person's respecting it, and you know that the other person's fighting for your good. That's the basis of trust in relationship. As soon as we have experiences where it's like, hey, I don't know if I can trust you, even in a small area, it's like, yeah, that becomes a hurtful moment that either needs to be repaired, a boundary line established, or again, if it's big enough, maybe walk away entirely.
Yeah. Last question is what's the difference between vulnerability and feedback?
Ooh, I love this question because like I talk about it a lot because I think so many times people mix it up and they'll say it in the same sentence, which can be really confusing because we'll say like, "Hey, you really hurt me." Like, you know, I don't like that you did that. Can you change? And it's like that blends vulnerability and feedback because vulnerability is supposed to be about you. Feedback is supposed to be for the other person. This is how I'm experiencing you. Can you change this? Whereas vulnerability is like, I'm inviting you into my experience. This was what I thought. This is what I felt. This is who I am. And this is what's showing up for me. I don't have anything. It's not about you. I'm not asking to draw attention to you and your behavior. I might not even be asking you to change. I actually just want you to see me and embrace me and connect with me in my experience. And so vulnerability is pretty intimate. Feedback can be given without vulnerability. Feedback can be very almost like blunt of, hey, this happened. I want it to change. Are you willing to do something different? Sure, yes, no, what have you. Whereas again, vulnerability, it's like it's a bit more risky, and can be a bit more harder to communicate.
Yeah. I love that you clarified that. And it can definitely be flipped, especially when manipulation is present or when the other person's not realizing that they're being manipulative. They're wanting things a certain way, maybe because they're so used to doing that. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely like a difference between the two. So, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, for sure. I think even on that point, it's like someone who like, you can know someone's manipulating you if they take your vulnerability and it's genuine vulnerability where you're talking about your feelings and they take it as feedback of, oh, I must be a terrible person, or oh my gosh, how could you say that? It's like that's manipulative. Like you're not letting that person exist within themselves. That's a pretty good sign where it's like, hey, that's not cool.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for another in-depth conversation, and especially one that I feel like this really wrapped up relationships, like as a whole, as a piece. We covered so much. We talked about obviously anxious and avoidant attachment styles. We talked about AI and technology and relationships, how relationships have changed over the last few decades. And yeah, I love the part where we discussed the fact that relationships are a form of healing, and it is a way to have further understanding of yourself. Even if triggers do come up, they are beautiful, and they can allow us to evolve and, be even better people. And, we then talked about self actualization and how there is this move from romance to self actualization. But I think with awareness and love and, the team, the togetherness being the centerpiece, I think that can definitely change that. So, to the listeners, I hope that you guys got a lot out of this episode. I truly have really enjoyed this conversation, and if you have too, please share this with your friends or your family, the people that you care about, because that really helps bring the message out to more people, and it just helps this show to exist and for there to be a greater level of awareness. And thank you again, Marcus, for just all your wisdom that you have to share, your experiences, everything that you do your research on and that you read about. Do you have one last thing that you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap this up?
I mean, it's so cheesy, but I feel like it's worth saying. Like, as you said, like relationships are healing. Like to me, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is just like love is worth it. I think I've had different experiences where I've been really, almost encouraged to wall up, to protect myself, and to try to pull away and try to stay safe away from harm's way. And for me, I just realized like it's not that takes away so much fulfillment, and to remember that pain is part of the process, pain is part of life, and of course, we don't want to be in relationships that are primarily painful, but trying to remove pain from relationships kind of takes away the adventure. It takes away, so much meaning and fulfillment because again, in the midst of sadness, in the midst of pain, we get to experience joy. We get to experience the gift of being chosen, of being known, being sought after, and that only comes in the midst of potential rejection or potential pain. So as cheesy as it is, love is worth it. Relationships are worth it, and doing whatever it takes to have them is, I think, my philosophy of the way to go in life.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Yeah, that risk is worth taking for sure. And it's a journey and an experience that I think is unlike any other. There's no other experience in the world compared to love and relationships and being in relationship. Thank you so much, Marcus. It's been truly wonderful having you on the show. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing feedback from the listeners as well on this episode. And thank you again for joining us, for part two of this series.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you inspired to thrive.